Well, when I was a little boy sitting on my mama's knee.
Hello, welcome to Going Deeper. My name is Marcie Sclove, and we are in the second half of an interview I'm doing with Meg Gage. And this half hour, we are going to be focusing primarily on Amherst, the history of Amherst from Meg's long life of being here, and also about some of the town politics, the current Amherst Charter Commission that's going on, and also I hope we can touch on the issue of the schools that the special town meeting will be coming back at the end of the month. This is January 2017. Okay, so welcome back.
Thank you.
I wanted to start to hear about some of the changes. I love hearing these stories. Your house, your first house was?
The house we moved to in 1954 is on North Pleasant Street. It's unrecognizable now as a home. It's where Hair by Harlow and some other things are, because the whole part that's Hair by Harlow was our yard.
Oh, wow.
And my father had a medical practice in part of the house too.
Yeah.
So it's in North Pleasant Street. It was right across from the White sisters. They had a home there. They were two elderly women. They were the first Amherst girls when they were teenagers to have bicycles. And there were homes along there.
Yeah.
There was a Dairy Queen, and I used to be able to. My bedroom window doesn't exist because it's now been built onto, but I used to in summers look out at the Dairy Queen across the street when I was little, and I'd see these high school students out there sitting on the hood of their car, eating ice cream cones, and I thought that was the most extraordinary thing I could imagine, was to be a high school student in the summer and sitting on the hood of a car eating an ice cream cone with your friends. I just thought, wow, that's so cool.
And over time,
and the mobile station was there.
It was.
Yeah, and so it was a mobile station, the Dairy Queen, and then there was H.E. David's bicycle repair place, and then homes.
But the homes, the residential area, it stopped pretty close outside of town, right? I mean, So where was the end of town?
So going out East Pleasant Street, all those homes off East Pleasant Street were built later than that. They were built around the as the university grew very dramatically in the early 60s. Went from something around 4,000, I don't know the exact numbers, 4,000 students to 20, then 24.
Right.
The town really changed dramatically and mushroomed. So the housing off of East Pleasant Street was built, Echo Hill later, Amherst Woods, a lot of the developments, lovely middle-class homes outside of the center of town.
And also, were there more student housing built in that era, or not really?
No, they lived on campus, as I recall. There wasn't the off-campus student population that we have now. I'm not sure why.
Yeah.
But the North Pleasant Street had elm trees that created shade on the whole North Pleasant Street. And they all died. There were trolley tracks.
Wow.
That went up to Mount Holyoke. There were actually, I think, the trolley tracks originally back, turn of the century, when went all up and down the East Coast.
Sure. So I want to kind of just fast forward into what's going on now. I remember in the 90s I was a town meeting member, and going and seeing you and your dad sitting together. Right? So you learned about town meeting and saw it as something to do through that modeling of your father.
Sort of. At that point, though, he came into it because I was in it.
Oh, see, I made the other assumption.
Well, I would have maybe... He rejoined town meeting as an older person. Yeah. And we would go together.
Yeah.
It was nice.
But what are your thoughts about how the town is changing now, and how the interest in changing our form of government is happening?
Jumping in the deep end there, Marcie.
Yeah, why don't we just get to it so we have plenty of time?
Well, change is the only thing you can that can be counted on as change, which is good, usually, and influencing change so that it is good.
Yeah.
So I'm not one of these people, nostalgic. I don't usually go around talking about how long I've lived here. I'm not opposed to change. And I think it's important to pay attention so you get the change that you want.
Yeah.
And any time a community grows very quickly, it grows. That's change in itself, and how it grows makes a difference.
Yeah.
I think we're going through a period now where the university is trying to seeks to become a major national university like Wisconsin, one of the big universities, which requires attracting out-of-state students. They pay more. They're more likely to be wealthy. They can afford to live. They can afford to have more choices in where they live. I'm embarrassed I can't remember the man's name on Fearing Street. It might come to me. He's done some research that shows that students living off campus can compete in the cost of housing with a family, compete favorably with a family that makes $100,000.
Wow.
So the change, Amherst is a much harder place for middle-income people to be able to afford.
Yeah.
And it's not just because we don't have a lot of development downtown. It's because we're not building middle-income homes.
Right.
And there's not enough incentive for that.
Well, not only the homes, the new homes aren't being built, but middle-income homes are being bought up by the developers and being used as rentals for students.
Some of them, they are. And less so in some of the neighborhoods that are really still farther from campus.
Sure.
And the thing is that we live in a capitalist, managed capitalism, and people have the right to do things on their property that are legal, which means they comply with the zoning.
Yeah.
And they risk a lot with investment, and they have a right to make money. It's not illegal to make money. That's what it means to be in the housing business. You don't do it to lose money.
Sure, sure.
And, I'm not trying not to say but, and that development has to happen in a way that is helpful to the town as a whole.
Right.
So my concern is that we aren't thinking far enough ahead to a plan that would turn that around somehow.
Yeah.
Looking at different kinds of incentives, because the town is changing kind of without us noticing in ways that we aren't. The ways that we're not noticing are more dramatic, in my opinion, than the things we are noticing. So we're noticing the high buildings and the students moving into them from off campus. But meanwhile, the school population is shrinking.
Yeah.
When Fort River was built, there were, I think, 241 entering kindergartners.
Yeah, wow.
And this last year, there were 95.
And what was the total population of students at Fort River?
Well, the school was built for 750. I assume that's about how many they had. I don't know.
Yeah, yeah.
And Wildwood was also built for 750. But the town is very has a lot of low-income people. We still need to do more with affordable housing. But there's a real demographic fracturing right now. And to solve it requires thinking 10, 15 years ahead rather than next year.
Yeah.
And my worry is that the debate in town has been structured around, do we want more development? How do we develop our village centers and our downtown? And the debate is between more buildings in our downtown or less, or smaller or bigger, or
taller or not
taller or
so tall.
not taller, parking or not parking, and we're sort of missing the forest for the tree. That's an overworked saying. So we're missing what's happening that's really changing our town in serious ways.
Wow.
So we can't afford boutique schools without the number of students.
Sure.
I mean, it would be nice to have, Marks Meadow closed, it was heartbreaking. We had 220 students, it was wonderful.
It was, in a way, what the model is that people are asking for now, sort of a small neighborhood school that the kids could walk to school and all of that.
But even there, most kids couldn't walk. I mean,
Yeah.
I don't think anybody can walk. The number of kids who could walk to Fort
Right.
River, you could probably count on your hands and feet.
And that's because the whole district for that school is quite large.
It's huge. It's Amherst Woods. It's Echo Hill.
It's up by Flat Hills and
Flat Hills. It's
North Amherst. Yeah.
It's not, so I don't want to be too controversial here, although maybe you want me to be.
I want to hear from you, actually.
So schools, there's a lot of history around the word neighborhood schools. And it's been code for people who live where I live, people like me, people who live here. It's code for, it's been code for segregation. It's been code for NIMBY attitudes, not in my backyard. And, in New York, in Brooklyn, they have neighborhood schools that have, 2,000 kids in them. They all live, they all actually can walk.
Yeah, yeah.
So I'm very concerned about, financially I'm concerned about schools that have half the number of kids in them that used to have. Can we afford that? I'm concerned about the fact that the schools without busing kids out of their district mean that children will go to school with largely students from the same socioeconomic background.
So they don't get to meet kids
who are from low income.
Yeah.
As much. I mean, it's not.
There was a
black and
young
white.
woman who spoke at town meeting not that long ago who was very eloquent about that she was sorry she had missed growing up with kids of color and different economic groups.
High school senior, Carolyn, I can't remember.
Okay, I don't know her name.
She was great.
Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, and when you bus kids but they don't live with those near those children, it's just, it's hard.
Yeah.
But even at Marks Meadow, my kids had to take the bus. It was a mile away.
Sure.
I'd say a mile. I mean, they could have walked.
Right.
You hear about these good old days when people walked 2 miles to school but it's not safe.
So we're talking about the school issue and this, revisit that we'll be doing. I'm also a town meeting member. But how do you feel that relates to the Charter Commission and the work that you're doing on the commission?
I'm not sure. So the Charter Commission relates more to what I was speaking about earlier, which is how we do development,
right?
Who decides, how much participation is there, and all that's become much, much more complicated by I hate to say rancor, but the sort of unhealthy attitudes people bring to the debate. I love debate and controversy.
Yeah.
But when it becomes ad hominem or people assign motives or interpret everything you say based on what they think of you and how whether they like,
and that there's a lack of just basic trust?
It's a lack of trust. There's a lack of honest conversation. There's a lack of common ground. There's a lack of looking for common ground. There's a lack of communication skill. Or people who have communication skills throwing them out the window and saying things that are just, wacky. And it's like, really? Is that really what you think? Is there another way you could have said that, maybe? I mean, it's just, I don't know what to do because it is larger than Amherst. It's
sure. Amherst, believe it or not, I'm always surprised by this, but we are somewhat of a microcosm of the country at large.
Right.
Even though we think that we're so much different.
Right.
Yeah.
So I'm not sure what the relationship between the school debate and the town meeting debate is complicated. One argument is that people who support the school are upset the town meeting defeated it, and so that makes them less likely to support town meeting. And there are people who perhaps the opposite, who maybe didn't care about town meeting, but they're so glad this got defeated that they like town meeting more now than they did.
Right.
I think that's probably there are probably very few people who are changing their mind over that.
Yeah.
I'm a supporter of town meeting, and I'm a supporter of the new school. I mean, that's kind of a...
Yeah.
I think that the Charter Commission has to deal with this rancor problem, in my opinion. And the two issues are related in that the school debate is fueling the rancor and the partisanship and the suspicion.
Okay.
And what I'm worried about, and I know at least some other Charter Commission members are worried about, is that whatever we come up with, it will create winners and losers, especially if we have a 4-5 vote in support of the charter. That's just barely a majority.
Right.
And the question then for the Charter Commission, in my opinion, is do you, which I would support, but I may be a minority, do you come up with a charter proposal that's less bold and less radical? It doesn't necessarily get rid of town meeting, but changes it in ways that make it more manageable.
Yeah.
And that address some of the concerns of the other side, but without eliminating it. With the hope that that might bring people together, and then add some other things that would also create more opportunity for dialogue and conversation. Like I'm proposing neighborhood councils that could be 2 precincts, so they're not unmanageable, so there would be only 5, and that the town staff would have a leadership and agendas meetings, and town staff would go and present as requested information, so people would have access to everybody who lives there, not just town meeting members, but to try to create some other participation that would feed into town meeting, so that people who are the interesting debate that I had never understood till I was on the Charter Commission is whether or not someone who's a town meeting member is a representative of that precinct. So the word representative, there are 2 words used in the law. One is representative town meeting, and the other is limited. When you take a direct open town meeting, which is everybody who shows up, and you reduce it to a certain number of people from each precinct, the 2 terms are representative town meeting and limited town meeting.
Right.
Whether representative means they literally represent you, in other words, you should know what people think,
Right.
or you just are the person who got elected.
Right.
And I'm not sure what should be.
It would be very helpful if we could agree on one meaning of what it is.
Right. Some people in town meeting will vote. I've heard of people like on the school vote, Jim Scott said, I was for the schools, but I voted against it because that's how my precinct voted.
Yeah.
And other people say, I got elected, and particularly this may be the most prestige they've ever had, and they go for it, whatever, they let their own opinion dictate.
I personally like the idea of calling it limited, because then it just gets rid of all the ambiguity.
Right. On the other hand, if people wish it were more representative, that's something that we could do. We could have these neighborhood councils that meet and tell the representative what they want.
Wow.
But a representative doesn't have to always vote the way in Congress, sometimes it's the brave congresswoman or congressman who votes against their district because of doing the right thing. So nobody should be a robot.
Sure.
But if we want to build in more sense that they represent a precinct, a part of town, and the precincts are very different. If you live in precinct 10, it's very different from precinct 9 or 6. Very, very different. And the things you have to worry about in terms of students, development, traffic, they're really different. We could create mechanisms so that there was more representation, like neighborhood councils. But I think people don't realize all the things that town meeting accomplishes. One that I think is really important is leadership development and talent discovery, because you learn so much in town meeting. I can't imagine how they would fill all those committee seats without town meeting to sort of identify the people in town who have talent and interest and skill.
Right.
And that's just one
and
thing.
Another thing that I've always thought is the ripple out effect, that the people who are in the room on a given night and hear the details of a particular part of our town can then go and tell their they're friends when they're having coffee together, or
Yeah.
they understand something in a deeper way.
Right. Or they can say, you've got to read that article on page 3 of the bulletin. It's
Right.
really important, and here's what I know about it. When you otherwise would just be flipping the pages
Right.
because you don't understand.
Yeah.
And there are things that, like whether the DPW should have a better headquarters. Nobody's going to. That is such a lack. Nobody's going to care about that if they don't actually understand how important it is and
Sure.
how much our public safety and the
Yeah.
snow plowing and so on depends
Exactly.
on them having a dispatching place that's functional.
I mean, even though it's quite lengthy, when we go through the budget, it's such an opportunity, and that might be something to change to shorten it a bit. But it is a time when we all get really educated about how many police cars there
Right.
are and how many fire trucks and how how all that works.
Right. And one of the questions, if it wasn't so contentious, whether it could be shorter. Brookline is a larger town, and they have a town meeting that goes for 3 nights.
Wow.
Whip through the budget,
Yeah.
whip through everything. And there's
Yeah.
trust between the town meeting and the town staff that we don't have. And
Can
it's hard to, maybe we should all go to Brookline and hang out there and see how they do it.
So I get, in my own mind, a disconnect when I hear people complaining that it isn't representative enough, but then move to the idea that a mayor, one person, would be more representative. How does that work?
Well, they say the council would be more representative.
And how does that work?
Well, they think that because it would be fewer, the argument goes, there'd be fewer counselors, that you would know who your counselor was, and so if they did something you didn't like, you would vote them out.
But if they did something you didn't like, that thing would be in place.
Right.
So that if you vote them out in 2 more years, you're still stuck with whatever
With the thing
they
did. Right. Exactly.
Yeah.
Well, I think the arguments, that's one of the weakest arguments for moving from town meeting to a council,
Yeah.
is that it would be more accountable.
Yeah.
And the argument is, well, town meeting takes so long, average everyday people don't have time to do it. Well, they'd have less time for a council. So that argument doesn't work for me.
Yeah.
The argument that makes sense is it would be more efficient. So,
But then the question is
At what
efficiency
cost?
a higher value than?
right. The fact is, in my opinion, I shouldn't say fact. The fact in my opinion. In my opinion, if we didn't have the rancor
Yeah.
and the mistrust, town meeting on both sides, but particularly on the part of town meeting, some people, a minority really, because actually town meeting passes most things by far, overwhelmingly.
Right.
This problem of town meeting would largely go away.
Yeah. Yeah. So I remember another factor that I think is relevant. I remember, I don't know if it was the first charter or the second charter in the 90s, but a lot of very
First, I think.
wise people who were knowledgeable, had been on the finance committee and select board and were in town meeting, and that they all, because they got, they didn't want to be part of town meeting anymore, they walked away from the process. And it was after that I felt that there was more and more suspicion growing, and there was a lot of expertise and historical institutional knowledge and memory, and people who had good heads on their shoulders who decided that they didn't want to be part of town meeting anymore. They wanted a change, and if we weren't going to have a change, they weren't going to get involved again. And I think that has had an impact.
Sure.
Yeah.
It's had but now I think a lot of those people who don't want town meeting are very involved, and they're there at town meeting, a lot of them.
Okay. Good.
I mean, the funny thing is about the Charter Commission is that discussions about town meeting, but we've identified at least as many problems with the executive function as with what's the legislative function.
Okay, so talk about that a little bit.
Well, just briefly, the select board could be stronger, in my opinion. I think this is my opinion, but that the town manager and the select board share an executive function, but there's also executive function in the school committee and the planning board. And I think we could make it clearer who's setting priorities and make it clearer the role the select board has in relation to the manager in terms of setting priorities and keeping and providing support to staff so that everybody knows what everybody's working on.
Yeah.
And you don't have multiple committees working on the same thing. I think there are 4 different committees that work on housing and low income issues. And they're not, so there are ways that there could be better coordination.
Yeah.
So I'm frustrated, this whole learning experience of learning so much about my town, more than I thought. Didn't realize quite what we were getting in for.
Yeah.
That I think we need to look at both, and simply having a mayor doesn't necessarily just do that. But
Right.
I think the thing I started to say before, I guess I'd like to be sure I make this point, that the Charter Commission has to decide, I guess I did make it, what kind of proposal we're going to make, whether we're going to make one that has 5 out of 9 charter members supporting it.
Yeah.
And then those 4 have to decide, are they on one of those going to write a minority report? So we have 2. Do you participate, or would it be better to do something that's more modest but has a chance of healing the debate? But really change town meeting too, make it smaller, maybe some more subcommittees. My proposals meet 4 times a year.
Yeah.
Figure out how to do zoning differently.
Sure. Within the state requirements, though, because zoning's a little
the state,
bit
man, the
tricky.
Massachusetts general law, they limit so many options.
Sure.
Crazy. And the other problem is it's a good thing, but it's a problem, is the open meeting law. We can't discuss things between meetings except in little groups. So you can't have, it's very hard to have exchange about your ideas. And what did you mean by that? And clarify that a little more. And we'll think about, what about this? It's very hard to do because it has to happen all in the meetings. So it's limited. People should come to our meetings. I don't know how far in the future this tape is going to be shown, but
it'll be shown in a couple weeks.
Well, we're going to be doing this through the summer and the fall. So
for all of those who are watching and interested, please get involved. Go to Charter Commission meetings. Run for town meeting.
Run for town meeting.
And since I'm thanking everyone because we're at the end of this interview, I'd also like to ask all the viewers to please remember to donate money to Amherst Media.
Yes.
We all need to put our focus there. And many thanks to the staff and the interns here at Amherst Media, and especially to you, Meg. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Marcie, and thanks to Amherst Media. I'm blown away by all you all do here.
Yeah.